This episode of the EV Resource Podcast is brought to you by Titan Auto and Tire. Titan has some of the very few independent auto repair shops in Central Virginia that are qualified to work on EVs and hybrids. And from hybrids to Hummers, they fix everything. For more information and to schedule an appointment for your vehicle, go to TitanAutoTire.com. Coming up this week, the Hyundai Ioniq 5 sells out. Volkswagen's Trinity program is in trouble. Tesla claims the North American charging standard. Rimac sets an EV top speed record, and more. Well, hello, friends, and welcome to episode 130 of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and interviews with industry experts. I am really excited about the news stories I've got lined up for you this week. In fact, in preparing to record this episode, I think this is the most excited I have ever been. This job just keeps getting better and better, and the industry and the vehicles and everything going on, this is so awesome. So here we are, leading off with a story from Hyundai. The company unveiled the Ioniq 6 earlier this year, setting a new standard in EV aerodynamics and energy efficiency for the company. The South Korean automaker's second dedicated EV is garnering significant attention, selling out within 24 hours of its release. Hyundai created the Ioniq series, combining Ion and Ioniq, as a tribute to the company's dedication to electric mobility, with the Ioniq 5 snagging over 3% of the U.S. EV share year to date, with only Tesla models, Ford's Mustang Mach-E, and the Chevy Bolt EV and EUV combo selling more. The Ioniq 6 will sit on the same 800-volt eGMP platform as the Ioniq 5, EV6, and GV60. However, the automaker has worked hard to ensure its second dedicated EV lives up to its standard, making improvements upon its already impressive Ioniq 5. According to Hyundai, its electrified Streamliner will be one of the most efficient EVs to hit the market, with a WLTP estimated energy consumption of less than 14 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. Hyundai also kicked up the range with the Ioniq 6, capable of 610 kilometers or 379 miles on a 77.4 kilowatt hour battery. Ulrich Michel, Vice President of Sales and Service at Hyundai Motor Europe, said this, quote, "This extraordinarily high interest in and demand for Ioniq 6 First Edition underscores Hyundai's leadership in zero-emission mobility. With its aerodynamically sculpted silhouette, long driving range, and interior that elevates the electric mobility experience for customers, Ioniq 6 redefines what a car should be. We are certain that European customers will immediately be drawn to our electrified Streamliner," end quote. And no surprise that within less than 24 hours, the 2,500 exclusively limited units of the Ioniq 6 First Edition were sold out. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't get one. You'll just have to wait until they start regular production and offer it here in the US, which it will happen. And you'll likely be in line with a very large group of people. Styling aside, the Ioniq 6 is easily the best vehicle coming from the Hyundai Motor Group. Personally, I can't wait to see if there will be a Kia and Genesis variants, kind of like the relationship between the Ioniq 5, EV6, and GV60. And speaking of those three cars, as a side note, this coming Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, if all goes to plans, I'll be heading up to Dominion Raceway and recording a lot of new content with all three of those vehicles. Hot laps to add to our leaderboard, drag races, and if I can squeeze out the time, I'll record enough content to do some quick walk-around reviews of each. I also still have the 70-mile-an-hour range test video with the Ioniq 5 all-wheel drive that I'm working on, so if you're a fan of the eGMP platform, keep an eye out in the coming weeks and months for much more from me on that. Next, General Motors expects its new electric vehicle profits to be in line with cars and trucks with traditional engines by 2025, years ahead of schedule and what many thought was possible. CEO Mary Barra on Thursday said the updated forecast factors in federal incentives under the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, which includes money back for companies that produce EVs in North America, as well as for consumers and fleet customers that purchase the vehicles. And that's something I hadn't read before. Of course, I've talked a lot about the IRA and the updated EV tax credit for consumers. I never realized there was money in it for the companies as well. And it looks like that is factored into the expected profits happening a lot sooner for GM. The incentives are expected to increase profit margins on GM's EV portfolio an additional 5 to 7 basis points from the low to middle single-digit range, according to CFO Paul Jacobson. He said GM expects to be among the first, if not the first, to be eligible for the full $7,500 consumer tax credit that will take into account stricter sourcing of EV battery materials. And obviously, we've talked about that before. If you haven't heard me talk about it enough, you can go back to episode 116 and 118, where I really dive into a lot of detail about the IRA. GM also said that it plans to reduce its Ultium cell costs to $87 per kilowatt hour in 2025 and below $70 per kilowatt hour by later in the decade. That would be a substantial decline compared to what they say is today's expected costs, but they declined to actually release what those numbers are. The company's product plans through 2025 will include several EVs the company has already announced, such as the all-electric versions of the GMC Sierra and the Chevy Silverado pickups, and Chevy Blazer and Equinox SUVs. Those are in addition to updates to popular gas-powered models, such as the Chevy Traverse, the GMC Acadia SUVs, as well as an electrified Corvette, which I don't know if I've talked about their plans for the Corvette on the podcast or not. I might have at one point. I should again, because it's really freaking cool. In 2020, GM said it would release at least 30 new EVs globally by 2025, including more than 20 just for here in North America. It's unclear whether the company still plans to achieve that goal, as it has shifted to focus more on its EV capacity rather than the number of models being released. Either way, if a company can make EVs profitably, they are going to be incentivized to make more of them. This is a good thing, regardless of what you think about the company, GM. And I have definitely been critical of GM quite a bit. But if one thing is for sure, if they can be profitable making EVs, then they are going to really, really focus on making a lot more. And that is great. But unlike GM, Volkswagen might be stumbling a little bit when it comes to the EV plans that they had. Volkswagen's Project Trinity is in question, or at the very least will be significantly delayed. This was something that I had considered being a problem after the transition in leadership to Oliver Bloom, who hasn't been exactly the best friend to EVs and the future of electrifying transportation, or at least not compared to Herbert Diess anyway. The focal point of Volkswagen's plan is Project Trinity, a flagship EV meant to combine a new platform, the SSP, with high-level autonomy and cutting-edge production process. Volkswagen's initial plan involved building a dedicated factory costing more than $2 billion for the platform, with the goal of producing 250,000 cars annually at breakneck speed. The factory is reportedly meant to break ground in Volkswagen's home of Wolfsburg in spring of next year and begin production in 2026, but that is certainly in question at this point. And that was something that former CEO Herbert Diess really was pushing, saying that they needed to be competitive, especially with Tesla. And honestly, without that factory, I don't see how Volkswagen is going to be able to do that. However, Volkswagen's new passenger cars CEO, Thomas Schaefer, revealed that Volkswagen's audit of the company has resulted in Trinity's delay by 2 or more years to 2028 or beyond, and the possible cancellation of that specialized factory. Schaefer said that with Volkswagen planning to phase out some combustion-engined models, it may have room to put Trinity's production lines in an existing plant. At the Los Angeles Auto Show, Schaefer told Autocar, quote, "By the time we were planning to bring the car in the middle of 2026, the factory at Wolfsburg, actually 4 factors, was a chock-a-block. To integrate another car almost diagonally into the factory would have been a total disaster. Not possible. So we had to make a plan for another factory close by, run it up, clean up the rest, and then reintegrate as much as we can into the old factory. We're not 100% sure what comes when, but what we know is that everything slides a bit back by, say, 2 years on the Trinity side specifically. That allows us potentially to integrate the vehicle into the existing factory because by then, ice volume in the factory will reduce and we won't have the problem that it's too full to integrate another car, end quote. And Schaefer didn't identify which plants could house Trinity production, as he reportedly said Volkswagen isn't yet certain of what its plan will be, and that the decision must also work for brands under Volkswagen's wing like Audi and Porsche. And at one point, I would have put my money on Volkswagen leading the EV transition with regards to at least its European competition, but now I'm not so sure. The last thing anybody wants is for a company to slow down their pace towards electrification. And yeah, I understand where Volkswagen is coming from, but still, it slows things down and gives their competition, specifically Tesla, a much bigger lead. Next, you may or may not have heard of Redwood Materials, and that's okay. It's a battery recycling company that was started by former Tesla titan J.B. Straubel. Since leaving Tesla, Straubel has been working on solving the problem of EV battery recycling and preparing for the expected wave of incoming battery materials. One really cool thing about battery recycling is that in addition to disassembly and recycling of minerals, it also allows for new battery components to be manufactured very, very easily. And to that point is the focus of this next story. Redwood Materials announced that they have landed a multi-billion-dollar deal to supply critical battery components to Panasonic as efforts accelerate to build a domestic supply chain here in North America to support the coming influx of electric vehicles. Redwood will supply Panasonic Energy of North America with cathode material for battery cells produced at a new factory that's currently under construction in Kansas. The new $4 billion Panasonic factory, which will be larger than Tesla's Gigafactory in Nevada, is expected to begin mass production of its 2170 cylindrical lithium-ion cells by March of 2025. Lithium-ion batteries, for those of you who don't know, and I do try to always add a little bit of an educational component into the podcast, lithium-ion batteries contain basically three main building blocks, if you will. There are two electrodes, one an anode, or the negative side, and then the cathode, which is the positive side of the battery. Typically, in the middle of the two electrodes, there will be an electrolyte that kind of acts as a path for the ions to move between the electrodes when charging and discharging. Cathode foils, which account for more than half the cost of a battery cell, often contain lithium, nickel, and cobalt. What Redwood is able to do is capture all of those materials through its battery recycling and processing. Obviously, this is something you want to do because that's where the value of the battery is. You don't want to throw that away. So this is easily something to say to your friends, or maybe not so friendly people that are in your life that talk about putting batteries in landfills. It's not going to happen. And according to Straubel, the cathode materials that they are going to supply to Panasonic at the Kansas factory will initially contain about 30% recycled lithium and nickel and 100% recycled cobalt. That percentage will increase, well, not the 100%, of course, but the other percentages will increase as more batteries no longer have a useful life and then enter into a pipeline where they are recycled and processed. What this means, and something that I try to tell people all the time, is with battery materials, we are going to eventually reach a point where all of the minerals needed for all of the EV batteries from now to the end of time will have already been pulled out and mined from the earth. We won't need to mine anymore because we will be able to recycle them. That is a point I really want to stress. And honestly, it's super exciting, and J.B. Straubel is excited too, saying, quote, "It's pretty exciting. Real example of the closed loop ecosystem actually happening. It will take a while for the industry as a whole to have enough material in circulation to do that. We're a long way from that for every element, but it can happen much sooner with things like cobalt," end quote. The Kansas factory deal expands on Redwood's existing partnership with Panasonic. Several years ago, they began recycling the scrap from battery cell production at the Tesla Gigafactory, extracting and then processing minerals like cobalt, nickel, and lithium that are typically mined, and then supplying them back to Panasonic. Redwood also recycles consumer electronics like cell phone batteries, laptop computers, power tools, power banks, scooters, and electric bicycles to access, process, and supply critical materials to companies like Panasonic and Amazon. The Carson City, Nevada-based company recycles about 10 gigawatt hours of battery material annually, and that's increasing daily, according to Strobel. Redwood has since expanded beyond the recycling business, a move that is part of Strobel's strategy to create a circular supply chain. In January, Redwood said it would supply Panasonic with copper foil produced from recycling materials, a critical component of the anode side of the battery cell. Redwood is expected to start producing the copper foil this month. They are also making major investments in the U.S., including building its own factory to bring cathode production online and ramp to 100 gigawatt hours, enough for 1 million EVs by 2025. Strobel, who wouldn't give an exact investment figure, said the company is spending several $billion on these efforts. So I guess it's good that they're getting a several $billion deal from Panasonic because they need the money. By 2030, Redwood said it expects production of both anode and cathode to scale to 500 gigawatt hours a year of materials. Redwood has reached agreements with a number of other automakers and OEMs, including Ford, Proterra, Toyota, and Volvo, to collect, refurbish, and recycle batteries and battery materials that can be sent back and forth to each company's respective battery plant. Those deals will likely continue as auto manufacturers and cell manufacturers bring more production to North America. That trend, which started a couple years ago, has accelerated now with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. Strobel said the IRA sort of straps rocket boosters on this entire industry and direction. It obviously accelerates everything and provides a lot stronger incentives and demand to do this sooner, end quote. Yeah, no kidding. The massive shift in so many areas of the supply chain related to electric vehicles as a result of the IRA's passing has been incredible. Regardless of the integrity of the law or if future politicians strike down parts or all of it, what has been set in motion right now isn't likely to change course or slow down. And I've never been a fan of politicians. I'm not shy about admitting that. But what the current administration and Congress have done with the IRA is something that will affect change globally for the rest of our lifetimes. Next, Tesla is receiving a lot of criticism. And yes, I know you're probably thinking again, but criticism this time is well earned. You see, 10 years ago, when the modern EV industry was still in its infancy, Tesla started to produce the Model S and with it, their proprietary charging connector. Meanwhile, the group of people who make standards for things like charging connectors had already developed the J1772 plug, which is the standard plug for North American automobiles, and the CCS or combined charging standard plug. So for years, here in North America anyway, we've had a few different charging connectors that were used. Tesla had their proprietary plug for Tesla vehicles, and the rest of the manufacturers used the CCS connector. And yes, I know I'm leaving out the CHAdeMO connector that was used for the Nissan Leaf and a couple of other low-volume Japanese EVs. But for a decade now, Tesla has been silently building out their own network of superchargers with their own plug. In Europe, however, Tesla has outfitted their vehicles with the CCS Type 2 connector that is considered the European standard. So they already have a track record of ditching their own connector in favor of the Continental standard. But not here. Tesla has never publicly given any indication that they would adopt the CCS Type 1 connector that is the standard here in North America. Now, I give you all that backstory as context so you can understand the current situation and maybe be able to take a wider viewpoint on what Tesla is doing. Last week, Tesla announced unilaterally that their connector is now the North American Charging Standard, or NACS. The reasoning behind this is sound. Tesla's connector is smaller, easy to use, and more capable than the CCS and incorporated J1772 connector that is the standard. Tesla figures that their connector is the better technology, therefore everybody else should just ditch the CCS plug and go with their connector. Well, there's a couple of problems with this. First, Tesla's plan is a clear smack in the face to the regular standardization efforts. And secondly, the timing seems to make it targeted at satisfying the requirements of the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or NEVI, program that was recently introduced. What Tesla is doing, though, this is not how standards are made, by simply declaring that what you have is now the standard. Standards are made by standards organizations. These organizations form committees made of interested stakeholders who jointly work out all the details. The result then from a standards committee is a document full of stiff language that precisely documents the topic of the standard. The timing here is definitely suspect. For years, Tesla could have brought their charging connector to the SAE J1772 committee for consideration, but Tesla did not do so. And even in March of 2018, the group that develops and promotes the CCS charging protocol held a major meeting directly across the highway from Tesla's factory in California. Was Tesla there promoting their connector? No. Tesla did not attend, even though the meeting was literally held on their doorstep. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. I could have you all follow me down a rabbit hole of technical specifications about how charging connectors work and how standards work and how Tesla's timing with the NEVI formula for potential build out of charging infrastructure seems very suspect. But that's honestly kind of boring and doesn't add much value to the point I'm trying to make. That being, you can't make a standard simply by saying your product is now the standard. And while I definitely support the idea that all EVs should use the same connector, or at least here in North America, and I believe that the Tesla connector would be the best one to use, I think Tesla is putting forth their effort here in the wrong way and a bit too late. Maybe they should have started this conversation and process years ago. And if they had, who knows where we'd be by now. All right, for the penultimate news story I have for you, I present to you a new EV top speed record. Rimac, our favorite Croatian automaker, has announced that its Nevara hypercar has set a new top speed record for electric production vehicles, reaching a claimed 258 miles per hour. The feat was accomplished at the automotive testing Papenburg track in Germany, an oval circuit with two straights, each measuring about 2.5 miles long, just enough space for the Nevara to rocket to its top speed. The car was piloted by Miro this is a hard one, Zernchevik, and I probably butchered that. But it's the company's chief test and development driver, and the car was, of course, set in its top speed mode that reduces drag while maintaining enough downforce to remain stable at high speeds. A Michelin technician also verified the condition of the road-legal Michelin Cup 2R tires before the Nevara set off. The record attempt was measured with a RaceLogic V-Box data recorder, and the Nevara matched the targeted speed originally set by Rimac when the car was first shown at the 2018 Geneva Auto Show as the prototype C2. Unlike the top speed runs by the Bugatti Veyron Supersport in 2010 with a top speed of 267 miles an hour, or the Koenigsegg Agera RS in 2017, that one was 277 miles an hour, both of those used a two-way average to account for differences in wind and other environmental conditions. And honestly, that is the way that top speed records should be set. The Rimac Nevara's record, however, was only calibrated with just one run, similar to the 304 mile an hour record set by the Bugatti Chiron Supersport 300 Plus in 2019. So it might be an unofficial record, but regardless of that, 258 miles an hour is pretty impressive. Just don't get your hopes up to be able to hop in one and drive nearly 260 miles an hour on your own, though. For the customer, the Nevara is limited to a top speed of only 219 miles an hour, which is just 3 miles an hour faster than the top speed of the Tesla Model S Plaid that was modified to remove its speed limiter. I mean, that's just not good enough. 219? I mean, come on. That's pretty fast. Rimac says that at special events, with the support of their team, customers will be able to unlock the Nevara's 258 mile per hour maximum speed. So at least you have that. The good news is that customers won't need assistance, however, to attempt to replicate the 8.582-second quarter-mile run that the Nevara set last year to become the world's quickest accelerating production car. So, yay to being quick and not insanely stupid fast. Although, I'd rather have both, wouldn't you? Okay, and lastly for the news is a story about Brightdrop, the commercial EV van subsidiary of General Motors, and the expected success the company is projecting for the next year. The company is forecasting $1 billion in revenue for 2023, which it disclosed during GM's annual Investor Day last Thursday. Brightdrop CEO Travis Katz is understandably excited about this forecast. This announcement during the GM Investor Day is actually the very first time that Brightdrop has released a revenue forecast ever. And man, what a way to start, right? Katz told CNBC, quote, "What we are seeing is an incredible amount of demand. This isn't just about saving the environment or the planet. This saves companies money. That's part of why we're seeing so much interest in the middle of a lot of economic uncertainty," end quote. Brightdrop estimates that operating one of its Zevo all-electric delivery vans costs approximately $10,000 less than a comparable internal combustion engine vehicle. The company has 25,000 reservations and letters of intent from large fleet operators, including Walmart, FedEx, and Verizon. And FedEx and Kroger are also testing the use of Brightdrop's Trace e-carts, which are motorized pallets that can be used for package or grocery delivery or inside a warehouse. Katz continued to say, quote, "All of these big companies have made commitments to their customers and to their shareholders to start eliminating carbon emissions. A lot of them have committed to zero emissions goals by 2035 or 2040. So they're really looking for help, and we're going to help the world's largest companies meet those goals," end quote. Brightdrop also expects the $30,000 tax credit for commercial EVs in the IRA to be a tailwind for sales going forward. IRA being Inflation Reduction Act, in case I need to mention that again. In December, Brightdrop will open up a factory in Canada, and Katz said Brightdrop will continue to operate as a part of GM despite being based in Silicon Valley, and there are no plans to spin off the EV maker into a separate company. So that'll take care of the news segment this week. I'll be right back with your answers to last week's question of the week, and I'll have a new question for you all to ponder as well, so stick around. All right, now it's time for the question of the week. Each week, I propose a question to all of you and eagerly await your answers and thoughts regarding a subject in that podcast episode. Last week, we were talking about EVs being brought to market with price tags well above $100,000, and I just keep noticing we aren't seeing too many being introduced in what I would consider an affordable price range, something like $35,000 for maybe a smaller, lower range EV, and around $50,000 or so for a longer range EV or SUV or something like that. So I asked all of you, at what price point should automakers introduce new EVs? Should we have more affordable options? And yes, I know this is an easy question to answer. Once again, we had almost a unanimous response, with 75% of the votes choosing the $35,000 to $50,000 price point. For me, actually, I was outside of the vote on this one. I chose the less than $35,000 option. And ultimately, I think the real answer is that we need EVs in every market segment at a price point that is in parity with gas-burning cars. So yes, some EVs that are less than $35,000, but also some that are more expensive as well. So thank you for your participation, and I encourage you all to participate in this week's question as well. For this week, I have been thinking a lot about the discussion around the North American charging standard and Tesla claiming that their proprietary connector should be used as the standard EV connector. Aside from my point on how they're bringing this up now instead of 10 years ago, I want to know what you think about what should be done moving forward. Should the auto industry and standards-making organizations adopt the Tesla connector as the true North American charging standard? Should we continue the way we are for the most part with both CCS combo and Tesla plugs? Or should Tesla switch over and completely ditch their proprietary plug and use CCS in the future? As is now customary, the poll will be posted for public interaction on the EV Resource Patreon page. You do not have to be a supporter in order to vote, so don't be shy about letting your voice and thoughts be heard. I'll also put a link in the show notes so that it's really super easy to find. Before we end the podcast episode, I have a couple of announcements and requests. If you enjoy the podcast, chances are you know people who will enjoy it too. In addition to sharing it with them, because it's the nice thing to do, leaving a review on whatever podcast platform you happen to listen to this through also helps people find the podcast when they are searching for EV-related subjects. If you want to listen to any of the previous podcast shows, you can find them on our webpage under the podcast section and on all of the best podcast platforms. If you're looking for more EV resource content, I definitely encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel as well as sign up for the digital monthly magazine. I encourage you all to follow EV Resource across your favorite social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. I want to thank our Patreon supporters. Thank you to Rajeev Narayan at the director tier, Christopher Lawrence and Andy Cooper at the executive producer tier. And if you enjoy the podcast and feel like I have earned your support, the best way to show that would be through Patreon. If you've been on the fence about supporting my efforts with the podcast and the magazine and pretty much everything that EV Resource is at this point, please head over to patreon.com/EVResource and check out all the benefits of being a patron. I've started to amass a collection of products and companies that I believe offer something beneficial for all of you. If you're interested in reserving an Aptera solar electric vehicle, and I don't blame you, they're pretty sweet, I have a referral link in the show notes that will give you 30% off your reservation deposit. It's only a little bit, but hey, if you were going to reserve one anyway, it helps me too, so it's a win-win. And actually, I am up to 3 people that have used my referral link so far. I would love to get 30. So we are 10% of the way there. If you're interested, definitely check that out and please consider using my referral link. If you're interested in solar for your home or business, and I know there is a lot of crossover between EVs and solar, Power Solar is going to be the company that I recommend. With potentially $0 down, they can get you started with a solar system of your own and help cut back on your electricity bill, make you more independent from the grid. All good things. Check out the link in the show notes for more information on that. OMU is selling lithium-ion 12-volt batteries for your Tesla or other EVs. Traditional lead-acid batteries underperform and typically do not last but only a couple years before needing to be replaced. OMU's batteries are the best performing 12-volt batteries on the market and far outlast anything else you could put in your car. I've got a referral link in the show notes, and if you use code EVR at checkout, you'll get 5% off of your order. And have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? I use Buzzsprout for my hosting and publishing, and they make it super easy to upload and get each episode distributed out to all of the podcast platforms. I didn't even have to worry about it at all. So if you have thought about starting your own podcast, I definitely would recommend using Buzzsprout as well. You can check out the link in the show notes if you want to know about the different options that they have to offer. As always, I invite your feedback via email to hello@ev-resource.com. I've been getting a number of people reaching out and asking questions about different vehicles and things, which I love answering. So don't be shy. If you ever want to send me a message, that is the best way to do it. Once again, that is hello@ev-resource.com. So that is all for this podcast. I want to thank you all so very much for being with me, and I'll catch you next week.